And you're back on Right Now with Jim Daws on the Mojo 50 Radio Network. Your daily journal of news, politics, and culture from an America First perspective. Well, radical leftists inside the Democrat Party are waging a war on law and order, supporting sanctuary cities, open borders, and the elimination of so-called cash bail. And George Soros has funded dozens of district attorneys candidates across this nation that refuse to enforce property and drug laws. The result of this movement has predictably been the breakdown of law and order as criminals are returned to the streets and adapt to the new rules. You can view videos online where robbery gangs are looting stores knowing they won't be prosecuted for theft below $950, and career criminals are allowed back on the street pending trial or repeating the crimes they committed only to be released again. To talk about this, we're joined now by Ken W. Good. He's a lawyer and is on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, and he's author of Goods on Bail, the definitive guide on bail bondsmen. Ken, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, you know, when I saw you were coming up as a guest, I was reminded of something on the campaign trail recently.
What business are you in, sir? The mailbox business? Oh, bail bond. Whoa, that's good. Do you know Hunter Biden? Do you know Sleepy Joe?
Now, this is serious. This is a serious topic. I want to get back to it. So I know that you've been visited there in Texas, of all places, especially in Harris County, the home of Houston, Texas, by this movement to abolish bail bondsmen, and one of these Soros-funded district attorneys has won there. What has been the result of these practices in Texas?
It's been an utter failure. You know, it's been creation of chaos. The best example I can give you is just look at their numbers of pending cases. The misdemeanor courts have had their cases, double in the last year. And if they were to do that again in another year, criminal justice would just shut down. It's just, and what we're finding is when somebody fails to show up for court, their case gets put on hold and they're still arresting people. And so it's just logical that would slow down and muck up the system. But suddenly it's oh my gosh, we never know that this was going to happen. It's because we have activists setting policy and not the people who are experts in the area setting policy.
Well, I think these results were perfectly predictable, and law and order advocates and lifelong district attorneys had predicted that this would happen. There in Harris County, are they abolishing cash bail, or have they taken the discretion entirely away from the judge to set a level of bail at a certain amount that they can keep career criminals off the streets?
All misdemeanors currently, except for 7 carve-outs, never see a magistrate, and they receive a PR bond at an arbitrary $100 arbitrary amount. They never see a magistrate, like I said, and they're just released. And as long as it's on that list, it's not on the carve-outs, they never see a magistrate no matter how many times they're rearrested. The Texas Office of Court Administration has come out and said they oppose any other county in Texas adopting this model because it's just not working. You got people that show up or don't show up, the case gets put on hold. But when they finally do come, they get another PR bond, then they don't show up. It's just a vicious cycle, and they keep getting arrested for new charges, and they never see a magistrate because it's not on the list of carve-outs.
It sounds like
as long as they just stay on this list.
I was going to say, it sounds like the system would collapse under that regime pretty quickly. The definition of a misdemeanor is something that the penalty for which is less than a year in jail, and I think it's in my old home state of Georgia was a $5,000 fine. But those charges include quite a few violent charges as well as theft and property crime and drug use and a lot of things that really result in the collapse of law and order if you continue to turn a blind eye to it. What are some of the charges there in Texas that would fall under the definition of a misdemeanor?
Well, DWI second, assault, family violence, certain thefts. I mean, we've got really bad examples. We've got a gentleman named Alex Guajardo who actually got a PR bond for a DWI second. Within a month, got another PR bond for assault, family violence, and they issued a protective order for his wife. Within 2 days, he killed her and their unborn child. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, if he, the judges should have seen this escalation of him on what he was doing, that he was showing a pattern of committing more and more crime. I mean, this should have been preventable or was preventable. It wouldn't have happened under the old system.
Well, the effect it has is it relieves the criminal justice system from the responsibility, or at least eliminates the responsibility from the court system from guaranteeing or responsibility of public safety. And if you don't see a judge and a judge never has to sign off on it, the system's on autopilot, and these kind of things are bound to happen.
Yes, completely predictable too. I mean, anybody in the system would predict that would be what would the result. We had in Harris County, these reforms were not pushed by a legislature or anybody; they were pushed by a lawsuit. And the existing judges who were all in office opposed the settlement, and they were happy to give them procedure, which is what the cases were saying, and they were winning the federal lawsuit. But the problem is there was an election. All new judges were elected saying that they would agree to any settlement the plaintiffs wanted. And so they were tired of spending $8 million in attorney's fees. And so now they've agreed to spend $100 million to fund these proposals that even the federal court said were a lot more than she could have ever given in a trial. But because it's a settlement, they can agree to all these things, which in effect just changed the law in Texas.
So was it a judge that imposed this consent decree, or who was the defendant?
Well, it was a plaintiff, a group of attorneys representing some plaintiffs who said they could not get out of jail in a misdemeanor, but suing the judges. And then the sitting judges got replaced in an election, and the new ones came in and said they would settle. And they came in and gave the plaintiffs everything they wanted. And they presented the settlement to the trial court for approval, and she agreed to it, or she approved the settlement. She said it wasn't her place to get into whether the settlement complied or violated Texas law. Her job was just, to approve the settlement that they had entered into. So it was just a rubber stamp.
Well, Harris County, Texas, Houston, Texas, is also home to this Soros-funded district attorney that's made a policy decision that he's not going to enforce property crimes, theft, robbery. I think in Texas it's $750. So criminals now know that they're not going to get prosecuted for shoplifting as long as they keep the amount below a certain level. Is there some connection between this Soros-funded district attorney and what's happening with the cash bail case?
Well, the district attorney that you're specifically talking about is in Dallas County, and he
my bad,
and that is a separate situation. But the Harris County DA when she was elected, Kim Ogg, she originally supported the reforms, but even she has gotten to the point where she even thinks that they've gone way too far and they violate Texas law. And so at the end of that case, when they were doing their final settlement, she came out in opposition to that settlement. So while she was in favor of some reforms, she thought that they went way too far. And Dallas, what you're seeing there is a case of where there was a Soros-supported DA, and he has gone way too far. He's received a lot of flack from it and pushback. But he's a 1 year into a 4-year term, and he's holding tough on his decision not to prosecute certain property crimes. it's just exactly like you pointed out.
Well, it seems to me that Texas is probably the worst state you could possibly, put in policies that would allow people to steal from merchants and private citizens without, taking pressing charges against them. Have there been any instances of people taking the law into their own hand in order to protect their property?
That's a good point. I mean, Texas is a castle doctrine state. And so, I mean, the ultimate irony is that if someone breaks into your house and steals a small amount of stuff, they wouldn't be prosecuted. But if you're home and you feel threatened and you shoot them and kill them, you wouldn't be able to be prosecuted either. Although I would speculate that these same prosecutors would try to find some way to prosecute you because they want to send a message that can't be done. But the problem is Texas is clearly a castle doctrine state, and you're allowed, in some states you would be required to drag them over back into your house if they ran. But in Texas, you don't have that. If someone's robbing your house and running away with the TV, you could shoot them, and you have the ability, the right in Texas to defend your property, even to that extent. So it's just creating a terrible situation.
We've seen some of these other Soros-funded DAs use their office in order to enforce an ideological point of view, and you don't necessarily have to have a conviction when you press charges against someone to punish them, because you can break them financially and make them drag them through the legal system so long that they have to settle even for a lesser offense. So if you've got a DA that's saying we're not going to enforce property crimes, I would not be surprised at all if they also use their office in order to go after people who don't agree with them politically.
I wouldn't be surprised either, but I think right now that what we're seeing is mostly these crimes are focusing on businesses, and there's a significant pushback by the businesses because they're noticing, I mean, it hits their bottom line. They're already on small margins to begin with to be competitive. And so there's significant pushback. And I met with the plaintiff's attorney in Harris County. I was talking to him about the situation they were setting up. And I'm like, you don't realize that you're setting up a system that is doomed for failure because it will collapse on itself. And he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, you may run the current bondsman out of business. I'm hopeful that that's not true, but your system can't survive. And when you're long gone and these other activists are long gone and they've broken the system, we'll be the ones that'll be left with law enforcement to put it back together into a working order. And that's the reality across the United States.
The advocates for the abolition of cash bond argue that it's undue burden on poor people, and that if you're rich, you can get away with murder because you can always make bond. But that's not necessarily the case. The old system gave wide discretion to judges to set the bond at a level that would either allow the defendant to return to the streets under threat of losing the bond if he didn't show up for court, but it wasn't strictly to make sure that they showed up to court. It allowed the judge to set the bond at such a high level that they would not be able to make it, and therefore the judge could protect public safety. Do the advocates for this abolition of bail bonds not understand that, or do they just not care?
I don't think they understand it because, the biggest advocate in Harris County keeps saying exactly what you were saying. It's all about fairness. It's all about fairness. And we want a system that's fair. But the biggest problem in our largest counties, our largest municipalities, is how do you process a large group of people through the jail efficiently and cost effectively and without creating chaos or further crimes. And that system, as a byproduct of that, has to be fair to the poor and should not mistreat the poor. And what the 11th Circuit has addressed, if you have a bail schedule, and while it may not be as quickly for people who are claiming poverty because they can't afford the amount of the bail schedule, within 48 hours they get a hearing and their status gets elevated and they get special treatment. And so they found that that was a proper system, and it was not unfair to the poor. But when you're focusing only on fairness and you're not looking at the bigger picture, then it becomes, well, how do you process large groups of people to the jail? And what we're looking at in New York and Harris County is they never see a magistrate. They're just released, and that's a recipe for disaster, and that can't continue.
You know, Ken, I was a private investigator for about 20 years. I started out with the Pinkerton Agency. I've had a lot of dealings with bondsmen over the years. They're a colorful lot of characters. And in the time we've got left, I just wondered if you had any good stories about bail bondsmen and what goes on there in Texas.
Well, I do say that once you get a bunch of, and you have a lot of hot air, but I would say that these are some of the nicest people you've ever met. If they give you your word, most of the time you can swear by it. Many of them are second-generation bondsmen, third-generation bondsmen. In my professional life, these businesses have become, gone from being mom-and-pop shops that when the dad dies, nobody knows how to run the bail business, to being a true small business that employs people in the community. And we do one thing, and we do it really well. We get people to go to court. And we provide more supervision than the government can afford to provide. They have to check in with us. If they can't get to court, we go get them because we have incentives. We will take them to court. We check in with them. We now have apps where they have to check in on their app, and it gives us a GPS of where their location is.
Nice.
So we'll know where they are when they're checking in. And so, our friends on the other side don't think that the bondsmen really do anything, that we just take people's money. No, the reason why we have such a great success rate is we provide the highest level of supervision that's available today. The government can't provide that level of supervision because they just can't. They don't have the incentive, they don't have the manpower, and they don't have 200 years or more experience in doing it like we do.
Well, don't laws in certain states actually give bondsmen more latitude with regard to protecting constitutional rights than law enforcement has? When you sign a bond, don't you sign over the right for the bondsman to enter your home without further permission?
Not in Texas.
Not in Texas.
I mean, they can give the right to be rearrested, but the problem is in Texas, a bondsman does not have the right to serve a warrant. That can only be served by law enforcement or, like you were, a private investigator. So the bondsman could hire a private investigator to go serve the warrant, but the bondsman or recovery agent, but the bondsman himself cannot do that in Texas. So.
Interesting. In Georgia, you would have to have been appointed by the judge in order to execute a warrant. It wasn't written into the law. The judge could specially appoint you, by the court to go out and bring somebody in, but you'd have to go through a hearing for that.
I think in most situations, I think the bondsmen just go find out where they are, and then they call either a constable or law enforcement, and they get them to come and serve the warrant. So I think in most situations, it's just we go find them, and then we make a call to law enforcement to come and serve the warrant, so that because they can't do it. And in situations when we get into those higher bonds, then they will hire recovery agents, private investigators, to bring our lost children back home.
Ken W. Good is author of Goods on Bail, the definitive guide for bail bondsmen. He's a lawyer in private practice there in Tyler, Texas. Ken, do you want to give out your website and any other information that you'd like to pass on to the listeners?
Sure. If you want to find out more information about bail reform, you can go to pdtx.com, which is the Professional Bondsmen of Texas website. Or if you want to just find more information about me, you go to my law firm's website, thegoodlawfirm.net, and we will continue to educate people on these issues. There are things that work on bail reform. I've written several articles, one on what successful bail reform looks like, and we can always work to improve the system.
Where would the listeners find that article, Ken?
If you go to the blog on pbtx.com, there'll be a link to what successful bail reform looks like.
Good deal.
Really, there are things that we can do, common sense things that we can do to get more people to go to court. And the reforms that are being pushed with just releasing people are not any of the things that make bail reform successful.
Ken, thanks for joining us. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.